Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC 7. We ask experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today is International Women's Day. We'll be talking with a Southern California filmmaker who's using her skills to advocate for women's self-defense and whose group, the National Women's History Alliance, helped start Women's History Month nationwide. Also, the Russian war in Ukraine is raising questions and stress levels for adults. But what about for children? How do you talk to your kids about the war-related issues that may be causing them fear or pain? A Stanford child psychiatrist will be offering some insight. But first, the latest on COVID-19 as schools, companies, and events continue to relax pandemic restrictions. This transition period is causing both relief and worries, depending on your situation and perhaps your values. Joining us now to share how he weighs the pros and cons and to answer your questions that you can ask on our Facebook live stream is UCSF Chair of the Department of Medicine, Dr. Bob Wachter. Dr. Wachter, welcome. Good to see you again.
Always great to see you. Thank you.
All right, so it's been about 3 weeks since California lifted the state indoor mask mandate. How are we doing? Are we seeing any signs of adverse impact, or are we just continuing to drop in terms of cases and test positivity? I can't even say it now. Test positivity, and
that's how over the pandemic you are.
Can't say it anymore. Can't think about it.
Can't even say the words. I think we're doing pretty well. We continue to drop in cases, hospitalizations, test positivity. All the things that we're measuring to tell how we are continue to get better. And how low they'll drop is hard to know, and whether they'll be we'll hit a floor, and whether there might be a bounce either because of this new BA2 subvariant. That's a possibility, or it might start to go up a little bit because people are being far less careful than they used to be. Those are both possibilities, but for now, it's all clear sailing.
That is good to hear, and I'm just going to say she sells seashells by the seashore like 5 times before we continue with this interview.
Perfect.
All right, but in the interest of time, I want to touch on masking at school because that will become optional come next Monday. Do you feel fine right now then with kids unmasking in the classroom, whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated?
I think it's appropriate not to have a mandate. It feels wrong for the adults to be able to go into work or to the store or to a restaurant or a bar and not wear masks, and the kids who have a lower risk of infection and for whom masks probably do have a higher burden, that they have to wear them. So I think it's appropriate to remove the mask mandate because the cases in the community are so low. I think it's going to be important for parents who want their kids to wear masks for that they be allowed to do that, and the kids, to the extent possible, not be stigmatized for doing it. You never know why someone might be choosing to wear a mask. Maybe they're immunosuppressed or they have some special risk factor, but I think it is appropriate for the mandates to go away.
All right. Sometimes, when it's optional, it becomes harder, right? Because you have to do your own calculations. And I know on Twitter, you're always doing your calculations and sharing your thought process with people. So how about this? Let's say your high schooler sits next to somebody who you see as taking more risks, like, they go to big parties, Warriors games unmasked or concerts unmasked. Does that change your equation, or does it not matter since cases are pretty much on their way down right now?
I don't think I'd pay all that much attention to who my kid was sitting next to, because their risk is not just who they're sitting next to, it's just the kids they're exposed to and the teachers and the staff they're exposed to all day. So the mental gymnastics I would go through here would be, does my kid have any special vulnerability? Is my kid fully vaccinated? And what is the prevalence of virus in my community? In San Francisco now, the prevalence of the virus is very low. It'll get lower, I think, but it's very low. So the chances that any kid that mine is going to come in contact with is infected is much, much, much lower than it would have been a few weeks ago. But if I'm risk averse, or my kid has any special risk factors, I think it's perfectly reasonable to have your kid wear a mask in class. And if you are, your child has no special risk factors at all, and the prevalence of the virus is very, very low in the community, I think it's reasonable. And your kid is fully vaccinated, I think it's reasonable not to mask.
Okay, from masks to vaccines. Now I want to ask you about Florida Surgeon General, which is about to issue an official recommendation on behalf of the state for healthy kids not to get the COVID vaccine. What do you think about that?
I think it's wrong. I think the evidence that the being fully vaccinated decreases the risk of severe illness, decreases the risk of death. I think that evidence is very strong. Obviously, the kids have a lower risk than the adults do, but I don't see any good reason. The vaccines are so extraordinarily safe. I don't see any good reason that a parent would not want to fully vaccinate their children. We're also seeing some evidence of problems in terms of long COVID. And so I think doing everything, and for the kids in particular, we just don't know for sure that we're not going to find a year or two from now that the kids have some risk from their case of COVID. So I think we want to do everything we can to keep the kids safe. Vaccines are incredibly safe. This risk of myocarditis turns out to be very, very, very slight, and unbelievably small risk that a kid will get very sick from it. And so I think the benefits far, far outweigh the risks of vaccination. And I think that's a political rather than a medical decision.
Okay. You're one of the experts interviewed in a San Francisco Chronicle piece that asks, if you haven't gotten COVID by now, what are the odds you never will? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the best data say that about 40 or 45% of people have gotten COVID so far. I remember when Fauci said something a couple of months ago that it's inevitable you're going to get COVID. I pushed back against that because I don't think it is inevitable you're going to get COVID. I think if you haven't gotten by now, there's a pretty good chance that you won't get it in the next 2 years. That I don't think we're going to see major surges the way we have before. If you're fully vaccinated and you're willing to take another booster, if that's appropriate, I think there's a pretty decent chance that you won't get it. Now, if COVID hangs out forever, will you get it over the next 50 years? Probably, but I wouldn't treat it as inevitable, and I haven't gotten it so far, and I'm still working pretty hard not to.
Okay, me too. Knock on wood right here, see? Why is it advantageous to delay it? Let's say it hangs around for 50 years, as you said, is one possibility. Why get it, let's say in 30 years as opposed to now? What are the advantages?
Well, one advantage of delay is that there is a medicine known as Paxlovid. It's the Pfizer pill that is out there, but still in pretty short supply. And it's an amazing medicine. There are some drug interactions you have to pay attention to, but it lowers the probability of getting very sick, going to the hospital, and dying by 90%. And so, for example, I still wear masks in crowded indoor places, in part because I don't want to get COVID, because I don't know whether I'll get long COVID. It's still a small chance I get very sick. If I knew for sure, if I had a sore throat today, I do my rapid test, I'm positive, I could go to Walgreens this afternoon and pick up that medicine, and that lowers my chance of having a severe outcome by 90%. I'd probably stop wearing a mask. I'd probably feel like that's safe enough that I don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's probably the main thing, and I think that supply is going to grow very rapidly over the next 2 or 3 months. So I don't think you have to wait 50 years for it.
Okay. Have you seen or experienced peer pressure to unmask? I was just at a restaurant where there was a sign, multiple signs that said, please mask if you're unvaccinated. And it kind of made me feel like if I masked, it would be a sign that I'm not vaccinated. So I was kind of thinking, what do I do here?
Yeah. I worry about it. I worry about it more for the kids. I think that it's likely maybe less so in the Bay Area than other parts of the country, but I can easily imagine peer pressure and even bullying around kids choosing to wear a mask. At my age, I don't care. I'll wear one when I feel like the risk is higher than I'm willing to take, and the benefits of being unmasked is small. So I'm going to the Safeway in about an hour, and I don't really need to have a mask off for half an hour, and why expose myself to any risk at all? And yet I like indoor dining, and at this point, the rates of COVID are low enough that I am comfortable doing indoor dining. I think we should really be charitable with each other. People are wearing a mask either because they're risk averse, or maybe they have a risk that you don't know about from the outside. They've had an organ transplant, they have cancer. And so, yeah, I think some of that's inevitable, but hopefully people will be allowed to do what they feel like they need to do to stay safe, and not only stay safe, but they're also keeping other people around them safer.
That is one of the better things about aging, isn't it? We just need to please ourselves and answer by our own criteria. Don't really care as much about social acceptance.
I think that's right.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Look, you earlier mentioned long COVID and impacts that we may not be thinking about. And here's one. I saw 2 new studies show getting COVID can lead to brain shrinkage or damage. I think it's memory loss or brain fog. Can you explain what the findings were there?
Yeah, there was a study that just came out recently that showed if you scanning people who had COVID versus didn't have COVID, there seemed to be a difference in brain size. Don't think we know for sure whether that means there will be a difference in cognitive ability or memory or dementia or any things like that. But it's a little concerning. I mean, the idea that you've had this infection, you've cleared it, you feel fine, and yet, you know, months later you get a scan of someone's brain and it looks different than someone who didn't have COVID. There was another study that came out a few weeks ago looking at a year after COVID, cardiovascular outcomes like heart attacks and arrhythmias and strokes, and they seem to be higher in people who had COVID. I think it's not a done deal. I don't think we understand this well enough to say for sure that long COVID is associated with long-term adverse effects or risk factors, but I think it adds a level of uncertainty, and is yet another reason when people say, "Oh, why are you being such a wimp? You know, go ahead and get COVID. It'll help your immunity, and you're going to have, quote, a cold." First of all, a lot of people feel much crummier than a cold. Second of all, a decent number of people will still feel bad a month or 2 or 3 later. Right. And then there's this slight uncertainty about whether it's going to put you at risk for other diseases years later. And that's going to get resolved as the studies come out. But for now, it remains a lingering uncertainty.
All right, another piece away. Dr. Bob Wachter, thank you so much. Always great talking with you. I'm going to let you go. Meantime, I will take a commercial break and keep practicing She Sells Seashells by the Seashore.
You'll get it, I'm sure. Nice.
All right.
Nice to see you.
All right, nice
Take care.
to see you. Take care. We'll be right back, actually, with a local filmmaker and board member of the National Women's History Alliance to talk about ways to celebrate Women's History Month.
In commercial break.
All right, everybody. Say it with me. Not so easy, is it? She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. Is there another one to try? What are some other ones? I can never do the Peter Piper one. How does that one go? All right.
Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. How many pickled peppers did Peter Piper pick?
Okay, see, first I have to memorize that. That's our director who can obviously do it with no problem. Anyway, thanks for joining us. We have another great interview coming your way. Take a short break and be right back.
Back in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Today is International Women's Day, a day to celebrate social, economic, and political achievements of women all across the globe. And the entire month of March is Women's History Month. So we want to highlight an organization founded here in the Bay Area that's been committed to empowering women for more than 4 decades. Joining us live now is Ellen Snotland. She is a board member of the National Women's History Alliance. Ellen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Really excited to talk about this. How did the National Women's History Alliance begin? With what purpose and goal?
Well, it began with a history teacher, our founder, Molly Murphy McGregor, when one of the boys in her history class said, "Why aren't there any women in history?" And she was stumped. It just didn't seem right that there weren't any women in history, but she couldn't answer such a simple question like that. So that really started a lifelong mission of hers to include women and girls in historical accounts and curriculum. And that really started a whole movement of women's studies and women's history, and bringing women back into the consciousness of all people.
Wow.
And it's,
But that's amazing. Is that the class in Sonoma that I heard in 1978, the school district there organized Women's History Week?
yes, yes. As a matter of fact, I think I don't know my Northern California geography all that well, but Molly is still in Santa Rosa, and
That's Sonoma County.
yeah, yeah. So she's been going strong and continues to head our organization. And I'm so touched by the high school students we now are dealing with and inspiring to carry the torch forward, because they're like going, "What? How? I'm a advanced placement history student, and we have one paragraph about women in our textbook. This is 2022.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. And let me ask you, for those students who are asking those questions, where are we? Why am I not seeing myself reflected in our history books? Why is it so important to have them recognize women's achievements throughout history? And what does it do for them today?
Well, we don't have to keep reinventing ourselves every generation. When we can stand firmly on shoulders that have already gone before us, we are just that further ahead. We don't have to keep reinventing. And, you know, I think the biggest evidence for that is that we still have trouble electing a woman president, which is, you know, I don't care what people think of Hillary. Hillary is by far a most accomplished, and I mean, she was a Secretary of State, for goodness sakes. That's the same branch of the tree that Thomas Jefferson was on, and did amazingly well. I was in Pakistan right after Hillary lost, and we had girls coming up to us in Islamabad crying, saying, why couldn't you elect Hillary? She was here on a diplomatic mission, and she came out and met us, and she was so inspiring. We could tell she cared. And the globe was really, really unhappy about how we did not vote her in.
I mean, many countries have had female presidents, prime ministers, and hopefully women leading will become the norm, and girls need to see themselves in that position for them to feel empowered to do so. As such, I want to bring up your website and let people know about it as a resource, nationalwomenshistoryalliance.org. It's a tool to teach the public really about women's history. Tell me about some of your favorite resources found on the site.
Well, we have a speakers bureau, people that can go out and bring their program to schools. What I really like, though, are the gifts and celebratory packages available for classrooms. We want to empower teachers to be able to bring into the classroom pictures and posters and people that are out there, but it's in one really succinct gift store. And I would like to see a day where we send each other Happy Women's History Month cards. And Jackie Lawson, of the famous Jackie Lawson gift cards, they finally rolled out an International Women's Day card. I'm like going, I've been nagging them. I wish I could find a nicer word than nagging, but I was nagging them to include some kind of card for women's history. They have been doing Black history, and it's time that women of all colors be recognized.
All right, before I let you go, I just want to bring up that you're a filmmaker and you directed a documentary called Beauty Bites Beast to empower women to take charge of our own bodies. What inspired you to make that film, and what is the message you want women to walk away with?
Well, the World Health Organization says that 1 in 3 women are assaulted in their lifetime, and that's probably low. I mean, for me, I'm one of 3 daughters, white, privileged, had every advantage, and all 3 of us have been sexually assaulted in our lifetime. So that is, the 1 in 3 is low, probably. And women are basically raised to think that men are going to be there to protect them, and clearly in unchaperoned days, that's just not the case. So we work with emotional, verbal, and physical self-defense should it come to pass that one needs it. And the irony, of course, is that once you learn how to defend yourself physically, your verbal skills go way up. And because you can back up your words if you have to. And most assailants aren't looking for a fight. If they're looking for a fight, they go to a bar and find somebody else who wants to fight. They want to find somebody weak. They don't want to deal with somebody that's going to make a scene. Well, because what do predators want? They want privacy and they want quiet.
Well, Ellen, I do encourage folks to check out Beauty Bites Beast. Also want to let folks know we show the website and people saw it webinar later this month on March 26th. You can get more information on National Women's History Alliance.org. Congratulations. Thank you so much for chatting with us on this International Women's Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up next, we will be talking to an expert about the best and most effective ways to talk to children about the war and humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. We'll be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, everybody, thank you for sticking around. We'll be back after a couple minutes. Russia's attack on Ukraine has caused stress and fear for all of us, including children who may not be able to avoid seeing frightening images or worrying about their own safety, especially given social media these days. So how can parents and other adults help kids process the information and their emotions? Joining us with her expertise, Dr. Mari Kurahashi, child and adolescent psychiatrist at Stanford Children's Health. Thank you for joining us, doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Should parents, I know a lot of parents are asking this question, should they bring up the topic about Ukraine and the war? And if you're concerned, if the kids haven't asked any questions or made any specific comments?
It's a great question. It depends on a few factors. It's important to think about how old is your child and the temperament of your child. Most likely, regardless of age, children have been exposed to some of the news about Ukraine. If you have a younger child or more of an elementary school age child, it's helpful to inform in more concrete terms, keeping the information more simple, and perhaps using visuals like showing a map of the world and where Ukraine is. And again, describing very simply and concretely the situation while assuring them that adults are doing everything they can to keep them safe. If you have an adolescent, most likely they've been exposed to the news. And so checking in about what they've heard, what they think about the situation, how they're feeling about the situation, and having it be more of a dialogue is more age appropriate.
Okay. How could you recognize that they might be upset by what's happening? What are some signs?
Yeah, so depending on how much they're talking about it, depending on how they're sleeping, eating, their interest in things of usual interest, change in extracurriculars, things like that would be of concern. And checking in, observing out loud if parents are observing any changes, and asking them how they're feeling, how they're doing is helpful.
Okay, I know you mentioned, based on age, they may be able to handle different degrees of truth or specifics, but, I guess my question as a parent is, do you ever lie to a child? Or let's say they ask you, is the possibility there that there could be a World War III? I mean, do you come out and say, yes, it's possible, we hope not, chances are small, and people are doing everything to avoid it, but it's possible? What do you say?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think as parents, we're trying to balance many things. We're wanting to be honest, but we're also wanting to help our children feel secure. And so it's a balancing act. We almost always recommend to tell the truth, but how we tell the truth can be more nuanced and be sensitive. And so if a child were to come out and say that, most likely it would be more of an adolescent age child. And so talking about, yes, there is risk of that. And, what are all the countries working so hard to try to negotiate and navigate? And most likely for a younger child, they won't have such a concept of World War III. So it would be unlikely for them to ask that directly, but they might be asking more about safety. And so along those lines, there is risk. And adults are working very hard to keep them safe as well.
So what are some ways that we can tamp down their stress level? I've heard in the past that when you feel like you don't have power and you feel helpless, doing something to actively try to help the situation could empower you and make you feel better. Does that apply here?
Absolutely. So a couple of things. One, we have this expression of name it to tame it. So being able even just to talk about things that are stressful and emotional can be helpful. It doesn't eliminate the stress, but it can be helpful to feel supported and to have a safe space to discuss concerns. Also, it's an opportunity to be compassionate to others and to show compassion. And just like you're saying, to be helpful, even though it's a very difficult situation, it's not going to fix the situation. And there are ways that families can contribute.
All right, well, let's talk more about that during our break when we go on Facebook Live. Right now, we need to take a short break on the air. Dr. Kurahashi, thank you so much. Stick around.
Yes, Dr.
All right, we have about a couple minutes to finish up here on our streaming platform. We're off the air. But I want to ask you, how do we, do we as parents need to convey that, hey, we can help fix this? Or do we not need to think of ourselves as being fixers, like we need to offer solutions? Maybe do we just listen and not have to offer answers?
That's fantastic. So yes, so usually with parenting, we can feel like we're in a binary situation, and yet we're not. It's just like you said, that we can certainly discuss what's happening, validate what our children are feeling and thinking, and have a dialogue. And even though we're not able to fix the situation, this is a terrible situation where we're very compassionate to those in Ukraine and families who are affected. And we can still contribute. And sometimes that's all we can do, which is an important life lesson as well. It's rare that we're able to fix things. And so it's important to be able to talk about the difficulty of the experience and to do what we can within our limit.
Okay. What if you sense that something is wrong and they are worried, but they don't want to talk about it? Do you keep trying to kind of pry it out of them, as parents are so often trying to do with all things, just because we're worried and we're concerned? Or do you kind of leave them alone?
Great question. So children are usually responsive to feeling that parents genuinely care about them. So regardless of whether our children respond with effusive responses, parents checking in with authentic concern. How are you doing? Talking about any observations they're noticing. I'm noticing you're not sleeping as well, things like that. And then, but also not overdoing it, not over pushing them. If children don't want to speak too much, that's okay. Giving them space and yet checking in and also taking time to be with them one-on-one.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers today. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream, answering your questions. World News Tonight is coming up next. See you back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.